In the previous part, we've welded two figures together. Let's try that process again. Press F2 and zoom in. Make two random figures. As you can see, the weld icon is not active. Let's add the second figure to the selection and see what will happen. The weld icon still isn't on our property bar. To make it appear, we have to make two things. First one is to select the pick tool. Then we have to select, with the select box or while holding shift, at least two figures. After we do that, the weld icon will become active. We'll now talk about how to multiply one or more figures. To multiply a figure or figures, we need to select it. The easiest way to multiply a figure is to press the plus sign on the keyboard. Just press the plus key and move our new figure. Now, let's try to do the same thing by using only our mouse. Click on the figure with the left mouse button and hold it. Now, keep holding the button and move it to a different place. When the figure is where we want it to be, click on the right mouse button. Click on the figure with the left mouse button, hold the mouse button and move the figure. Keep holding the left mouse button. When we click the right mouse button while still holding the left next to the cursor, a small plus will appear. We can release all buttons, of course. We can also use the shortcuts Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V, in other words, copy and paste. Then, move the copied figure. So these are the three most basic techniques which we can duplicate our figure. Let's now select these two figures and duplicate them. Click on them with the left mouse button, hold it, move the figures and click the right mouse button. Let's duplicate them several times. Now, let's choose the same colour for all these figures. Now that all our figures have the same colour, we can move to the next step. Let's also delete the outline. Click on the pen tool and choose No Outline from the appearing list. If we would print it, these figures would be just the same as here. Select two figures using the pick tool and weld them by clicking the weld icon. It seems that there's no difference between these figures and these figures, but we know that they differ from each other. If we would print it, it wouldn't matter whether these figures are welded or not. Let's now switch to wireframe view. For now, we'll use only wireframe and normal view. Click on wireframe. Wireframe will show us all the figures by drawing these outlines around them. Now we can clearly see the difference between the welded figure and the other figures. This figure is a whole object, whilst these figures are separate. Let's move these two figures and go back to normal view. We won't go into a detailed description of each view now. All we need to know is at this point that normal view will show us everything while wireframe view will show us the borders of each figure. In other words, wireframe will show us the figures. It will show us in such a way that we will notice where these start and end. Let's now set the outline to one of these figures and see how it will look on wireframe view. Everything we need to edit, delete and create the outlines is right here. Lower on the list we have several predefined outline looks. Let's click on the first position and choose ourselves how thick will the outline be. If we want, We can also choose the width of the outline from the drop-down list. Let's set the width of our borderline to 4 mm and click OK. So on normal view we can clearly see the 4 mm outline of our rectangle. Let's switch to wireframe view. As you can see, this view won't show us outlines of the figures. It will mark all the figures for us, but it won't show us their outlines. Just some basic information about views. Let's switch back to normal view. Delete the outline of this figure. We can do that here, or by clicking this X icon with the right mouse button. Click on it with the right mouse button, not the left. Again, we can delete the outline by clicking on this X with the right mouse button, or by accessing the menu available under this icon. Let's now talk about something else. Let's set this circle's colour to yellow. Now select these two figures and weld them together by clicking on the weld icon. As you can see, the figures were welded together, and now they have only one colour. We can't make these figures separate again. Of course, we can go back by using the undo option. But to ungroup these figures, we would need to copy them or use dockers. Let's now talk about the combine icon. Here we have the combine icon, and here we have the weld icon. We can also access this option by going to Arrange menu and clicking on Combine. Please don't confuse combining with welding. If one overlaps the other, this will happen. Only when we click Combine. So the Combine option will literally combine the two objects into one and cut out the part where they overlap each other. Again, the Combine option will combine two objects and cut out the part where they overlap. The Weld icon will weld the two objects into one. Let's now undo the recent changes we made to the document. Let's see what would happen if the figures don't overlap. Here we'll weld them, and here we'll combine them. As you can see, both techniques has given us the same effect. Just don't confuse these two options. Combine and weld are two different tools. Remember that if the figures don't overlap, we won't see much difference between the two options. Combine and weld are two different options. Let's press Shift F4 to fit the document on our screen and delete the figures we've created for this example. To do that, just select them and press Delete. Let's go back to welding for a minute. Draw a rectangle and maybe a polygon. To make a triangle from this polygon, just change its value to 3 and then maybe rotate it a little. Now, duplicate these two figures a few times. We already know that after we select these two figures with a pick tool, the weld icon will appear. If we don't want to do anything with these figures, we don't have to, but weld is a really useful option. We can also access it by going to Arrange menu and then Shaping submenu. Here we have more options, so let's just move this palette to our screen by clicking on Shaping. A side window will appear from which we can choose Weld, Trim, Intersect and a couple more options. Let's now deactivate these two options. If we now weld our figures, they will simply welded together. Let's now check these two options, weld two figures, and see what will happen. The figures are welded, but the original source figures are left intact. If we leave only this option active, the program will leave only the figure we haven't clicked on. If we click on the rectangle, the triangle will be left, and if we click on the triangle, the rectangle will be left. So we welded our figure. As you can see, we still have our triangle. If we do it like this, the action, when we check this option, the process of welding will leave the object on, which we clicked. In this case, we have our welded figure and the rectangle. For now, we won't be using this palette. I just wanted to show you how it looks. We call such Corel palettes dockers. What we'll do now is just copy and paste our figures. Let's continue our task and finish making these speech bubbles. Press Shift and F4 to zoom out. Choose the ellipse tool and draw a proportional circle. To do that, hold Ctrl, draw the figure and release the mouse button. Again, hold Ctrl, draw a circle, then release the mouse button. This way, our figure will be proportional. Now draw a rectangle and convert it to curves. We can do that by clicking this icon, or by pressing Ctrl Q. Switch to Nodes tool, in other words, Shape tool. Move the nodes into a circle, then delete this node by clicking twice on it. Switch to the Pick tool. If we don't like the position of our figures, we can rotate the tail or move the circle. We can also scale up the circle with the corner transformation handle. If we're not sure whether the figures look good after welding, we can copy them. Select them both by clicking on them and holding Shift. Click on them, move them, click the right mouse button. This way we copied our figures. We can leave them for later. Select these two figures by clicking on them and holding Shift. We're on the Pick tool, so the weld icon is available. Now we can weld our figures. We can adjust the position of our speech bubble by rotating it. As a reminder, for operations on whole figures we choose Pick tool, press Shift and F4. Now we'll do this next speech bubble and try to make it look exactly like this. But before that, let's go back to the welding again. It's not that important, but let's devote one more moment to talk about it. When we've selected two figures with the selection box, the welded object will have the colour of the bottom figure. So, changing the order of the figures can affect the look of the welded object. We can also do that if we select the figure with the colour we want and then the other one. In this case, if we select the tail first, the selected figure will be yellow. So, the order of selecting the figure is important in welding. The figure which the colour we want to change, we select last. So if we click here first and then here, the welded figure will be yellow. And if we want to do it the other way around, click first on the circle and then on the bubble tail. Remember that if we select two figures with the selection box, the welded figure will have the colour of the bottom object. But that's not important now. We'll leave this for now. Let's click on our second speech bubble and rotate it. Now we'll create the last speech bubble. Draw a proportional circle. For this one, we'll use a polygon tool instead of the rectangle tool. Draw a polygon and change this value to 3. Now switch to Pick tool. Rotate the triangle. Well, this triangle doesn't look right. Let's convert it to curves. Select the Shape tool and modify it by dragging the transformation handles. Again, we're now working with the Shape tool. Let's delete these two nodes by clicking on them twice. Now, we'll weld these two figures. As the name suggests, welding is one of the processes which we can use to connect figures together. Switch to Cursor. In other words, switch to Pick tool. Now that we're on this tool, we can position our figures in such a way they will look just as we want them to look. To rotate the figure, just click on it once and then click on it for a second time. We can rotate it and then go back to the standard transformation handles by clicking on the figure once. We can also scale our figure proportionally or disproportionately. To select our figures, we click on each one while holding Shift or select them by drawing a selection box. We need to move further because if we click here, we won't make the selection box. We'll move this figure. We now have two figures in our selection box. This means we'll select these two figures. Now we can weld our figures together. Press Shift and F4. When it comes to welding, it doesn't matter in which order we select the figures. Of course, I'm referring to the final product of welding and the colour of the welded figure. So, the shape of the figure won't be affected by the order in which we selected the figures. Now, we'll need to cut the bottom of this bubble. Draw a rectangle here and follow these steps. Select these two figures, copy them, and move the copied ones here. We can use this rectangle to cut the bottom of the bubble. Please take notice that our rectangle is on top. It's because it was the last drawn figure. Every new figure will be created on top of the old ones. We can see this better if we set a different colour to each of these figures. The newly created figure will always be on top of the previous one. If we want our figures not to have any colour, click on this icon with the left mouse button. Just click the left mouse button, the right one will delete it from the outline. Let's click on the colour again. When we click on the right mouse button, our figure has an outline again, and in this menu here, there's an option No Fill. We can use the two techniques to cut our figure. First one, click on the rectangle, hold Shift and click on the next figure. Now we can use the trim option. When we click the trim icon, the rectangle will cut our figure. Let's try this again. Now we'll select the speech bubble first. In other words, we select the trimming figure, then hold Shift and select the rectangle. When we click the trim icon now, the speech bubble will trim our rectangle. So we can get two effects when we use the trim option. As we know, the rectangle is on top of the speech bubble. Let's now select these two figures with the selection box. The thing I'm about to say is true for all actions, not only trimming. When we select with the selection box and we take an action, this action will affect the figure at the bottom. So if we click Trim now, rectangle will trim the speech bubble. It will react the same if we would have more rectangles. Let's just duplicate them. Now, When we select it, all the figures on top will trim the bottom one. So when we select using a selection box, the trimming figures are the ones which are on top. If we select the figures one by one, the trimming figure is the one we select first. So these are the basic rules of trimming. We now click on the rectangle, hold Shift, select the other figure and click the trim icon. After that, we can just delete the rectangle.